Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Jeff Uerz, welcome to the Center of the Universe.
Thank you, Paul. Great to be here.
I really do appreciate you joining us. Your friend, my father-in-law, Al Draper, connected us, and he's been talking about you being on this for quite some time. And I'm like, well, just give me his number and tell him I'm going to call him, and let's get this done. And we ran into each other about, a couple weeks ago?
Right, yeah. At a bereavement reception after a funeral, actually.
Yeah, for George McFadden.
It was,
yeah.
And it was a sad day, but the bereavement group does a great job. The Alan Draper and Joanne and the rest of the guys and gals that work that really do bring comfort to people when they need it the most to kind of regroup after burials.
Yeah, communities need people to do those sorts of things and to be reliable at those moments when the family they're going through a tough time at an event like that or a loss like that. So it's wonderful work that you guys do at the church.
We enjoy doing it. It's really a privilege. We look at it as a privilege to be able to serve the community in that way.
Yeah, and you're also a member of the Knights that we'll talk about here in a little bit. But I want to start with where you grew up and explore your childhood a little bit.
Sure.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up in upstate New York, between the Adirondack Mountains and the Catskill Mountains, in the river valley there. And my folks still have a place up in quite a bit further north, not far from Lake George.
Okay. And Lake George is known for what beyond just recreation on the lake itself? Is it known for anything? Is it massive?
Yeah, well, Fort Ticonderoga was there. It goes all the way back, Revolutionary War and pre-Revolutionary War. Lake George sits between the state of Vermont on the north end and New York State.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of troop movements from the French colliding with the British in that area in the early years.
Yeah, a lot of their fighting was in the, I guess, that part of what is now the U.S., and it spilled over into what is now Canada, too.
Right, yeah. The French and Indian War was up there, and then the American Revolutionary War. The Battle of Saratoga is closer to where I was born or where I was raised. I was born actually in Utica, New York.
Okay.
It had this distinction when I was a teenager of being the safest city in America, which
really
is pretty amazing.
Deemed by whom?
By the FBI and the crime reports.
Okay.
It's the safest city in America. It was just a pretty amazing town in those days.
How many people were there?
It was a city then, so whatever that mark of a city would be. My wife's just from down the road, a place called Little Falls, New York, and their distinction is it was the cheese capital of the world in the late 1900s.
Because a lot of dairy cow, that sort of thing?
Dairy, and then just the climate was great for cheese production, and the first water-fired plant, factory was built in Little Falls, New York by Cheney. Hammer company.
Okay.
And they made hammers and tools, steel implements there using water power as the first source of energy there. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you grew up in, would you consider it a town setting, more rural?
Yeah, probably. I grew up in a neighborhood, but it was surrounded by farmland.
Right.
So I grew up hunting and fishing and being in the outdoors. I owned my first canoe before I owned my first car. I ran a trap line on snowshoes with my younger brother.
Describe a trap line.
A trap line is it's a journey through the woods and streams and forests, and you pursued fur-bearing animals. Many times we were trapping in farmland where muskrat and other animals were actually a nuisance to the farmer, but a welcome source of recreation and income for us as kids. And we bought our first canoe with money from the trap line, and
oh wow,
it was quite an adventure. We'd go out right after school, and we'd get home at dark. That was the only rule in my house growing up, was you had to be home by dark.
So your education after the school day was actually out in the woods.
It was. Yeah. I grew up in the woods, and there was a cabin with a potbelly stove that we'd stack with firewood in case we got wet on our trap line, and And it was mainly farmland, with ponds and streams running through it. So we'd hunt and fish and trap, close to the house.
It's an amazing childhood. You probably have really fond memories.
Sure, we were blessed to have it. I mean, it was truly a great place to grow up. Really good schools. Went to Shaker High School, and we had a Olympic-size indoor swimming pool.
Really?
And I graduated in 1975, so way ahead of its time. And everybody in the school, all 350 kids that graduated with me, had to be able to swim before they could graduate.
I think that's a good thing.
I think it's a great thing, and it certainly saved lives. Very different from what I saw when I moved south. I was assigned to Mecklenburg County on the North Carolina state line in Virginia as my first duty post. And the first summer I was assigned there, we had 19 drownings.
Oh, my gosh.
In one summer. And
that's incredible.
Yeah, as a 21-year-old new law enforcement recruit, dealing with 19 drownings was really hard. And I couldn't understand how a population could have so few swimmers and be blessed with a reservoir like Kerr Reservoir and Lake Gaston. But I came to realize for many of those people, the parents and the grandparents of those people that were drowning didn't have a lake. They had a river. So they never had an opportunity to learn to swim.
Yeah, it was moving too fast.
So, really, the lake caught them kind of by surprise. It wasn't important for kids to learn how to swim because all they had is Roanoke River at the time.
Right.
But as that reservoir filled and people started recreating, then that became problematic. And a lot of our work on that lake in the early years were to get people to use safety equipment, like carry life jackets on their boats. If you can't swim, wear a life jacket when you're out on the water.
Right.
So it was a big educational push for us and an enforcement push as well to get people to carry that equipment and have it in good shape and available for people. And as the years went on, because I was there twice, I was there for 5 years as a regular warden, then got promoted to sergeant and sent to Tidewater. But when I was promoted to training lieutenant, they moved me back to Mecklenburg. I saw a vast difference in the ability of people to survive on that water 5 years later.
Yeah.
Because people started to learn that when you go out in a boat, you need a life jacket.
Yeah, education is a resource, and it has to be available for folks in order for them to learn, and the equipment has to be there as well. And I imagine Mecklenburg is, back then, and certainly maybe even in today's terms, still fairly rural, and not a lot of access to things that people live in larger towns and cities take for granted.
I think when I first lived there, it was a one-stoplight town.
Right.
South Hill and Clarksville on the other end of the county were the two communities that were larger in nature. All the rest really were small, really small hamlets, and people just didn't know, but they learned with steady educational work and enforcement work what they needed to survive and stay alive. And really, in the later years of my career, compliance was great down there. I mean, people that came to Lake Gaston and Bugs Island Lake, when they saw a patrol boat come up to them, they had everything out.
Right.
They had their boat registration.
They were proud.
They were proud that they had their stuff right, and we praised them for having their equipment right aboard their boats. And as a result, I think fatalities went down in that lake system from the early days.
Yeah, it would have to. Wow, that's an incredible story. 19 in one season.
One summer. It was hard.
Unbelievable.
Especially as a 21-year-old.
Yeah, you'd never seen anything like that, right?
No, I never saw. One or two, yes. But
yeah.
It's tough.
Wow. Let's go back to your childhood. So
Sure.
when you were not in your house or at school, you were on the trap line, it sounds like.
Yeah, or fishing in the summers. I was expected to bring fish home every Friday night for a family of 6, and it was it was an embarrassment when my brother and I would walk in without fish.
Embarrassment and disappointment. I
It
imagine,
was,
for the rest
but,
of the family.
for the rest of the family, we didn't. It was probably macaroni and cheese for dinner that night.
Right.
Otherwise, it would have been bass or the pond we fished in was a water supply for the steam engines in the old days. And then as time went on, a nice couple built a home on the water's edge, and my brother and I walked down one summer's day and knocked on the door and asked if we could fish in the pond, and we're pretty much promptly told no.
Wow.
And a couple of days later, we received a call at the house, and the man said, "I checked you out with our game warden, and he knows you, and he says you come from a really good family. If you and your brother would like to come down and fish, you're welcome to, but I'm going to ask you a favor every once in a while." And I said, "Boy, we're glad to do you a favor." So we wound up building a footbridge for him, and he needed muskrat trapped out of his pond because they were undermining his trees that would fall into the lake. And so we did that kind of work for him for years, and it was a great place for us to go and fish and
worked
be
for everybody, right?
It worked for him and it worked for us, and he worked for General Electric, and really a great man, and I got to know him and his family. His kids at that time were grown, away at college or beyond, and so it kind of was nice for him to have some young guys around to help him set a ladder up or take a ladder down or clean a gutter out or something like that.
And to have the company, too.
And the company, he and his wife were lovely people.
Yeah, they just needed a reference to make sure you were an okay.
He checked us out, and he was satisfied.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, you mentioned bass. What else? What other kind of fish were you catching back then?
Back then, in that pond, funny story, the Ellsworths were their names, allowed a bait supplier to stock their ponds with shiners.
What are shiners?
Shiners are minnow for fishing.
Yep.
And the bait man would come in and net the pond for the shiners. Well, eventually, Mr. Ellsworth decided he didn't want the bait fishermen in that pond anymore for some reason. So the bait fisherman brought a bucket of largemouth bass and dumped them in the pond to eat all the minnows, so that nobody else could come in and net the minnows, which was a great thing that he stocked that pond with largemouth bass.
Right.
Because then, but the problem with ponds, as you know, is if you don't harvest the bass out of the ponds, they get stunted. They get all 12 inches or less.
Right.
A pond full of 12 inches or less fish is not great fishing for most people.
Right.
But for young guys, with private ponds not being regulated by the state, you catch 20, 12-inch bass at the time out of a private pond. It was perfectly legal and good for them. And then eventually, as the years went on and we continued to fish, those bass got bigger and bigger and bigger, and you'd catch an 18-inch largemouth.
That's
really,
a big bass.
Really nice bass out of the pond because it got more in balance with the way it needed to be. No predators.
No more stunning either.
Yeah, no more stunning.
Yeah.
You took the stun out of it.
Is bass good eating?
Oh, yeah. Largemouth bass is a good eating fish.
I don't think I've ever had it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, wow.
It's really good.
Is it sold in restaurants around here?
No, because it's a freshwater fish that's, that's not for sale. It's illegal to sell largemouth bass.
Because there's so few of them?
No, because it's a recreational fish.
Gotcha.
Not a saltwater species or a harvested fish.
Gotcha. We're going to talk more about that.
Yes.
All right. So when you're graduating high school, what did you think you were going to do? Did you know?
I absolutely knew that I wanted to be a fish and game officer somewhere.
Okay.
And I applied from Alaska to Florida.
Oh, really? You applied everywhere?
After I got out of college. And I went to a college that was fish and game based. It was a ag and tech school called Cobbleskill Ag and Tech. And I studied fish and wildlife there, knowing that that's what I'd need in my back pocket to be marketable across the U.S. And Virginia called me first. I was working for the University of Buffalo Foundation as a fisheries technician at Gunay Nuclear Power Plant on Lake Ontario.
Okay.
Lake Ontario is like an ocean. If you've never seen it.
It's massive. Yeah.
It's massive. And we did fisheries work checking the water quality and the impact of the nuclear power plant on that cold water system up there.
Right.
And actually what we found was, a cold water system, a warm water power plant, just caused fish and fish life to boom. And it was a tremendous rookery for fisheries,
right.
In those plumes of warm water going into the cold water lake. And we monitored those fish. Samples were taken for testing, and it was just an amazing job. And that was a grant job, and it ended in the middle of winter. And when I left Rochester, New York, I was driving a '62 Buick at the time, and the center ornament on the hood was all I could see driving down the road.
Oh, wow.
Because the snow was so deep.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And when I was hired by Fish and Game in Virginia, I was working as a water lab tech, testing drinking water for the town of Colony where I was from. And I was glad to get out of the lab, get back to the woods.
Right.
And the job of game warden was it's everything I expected and more.
How old were you when you knew you wanted to do that?
I was probably 8th grade.
And how did you know it was even a possibility?
I knew a game warden.
Okay.
And he was they called him special game wardens. He was a part-time game warden for the state of New York. And he was the guy that gave me my first trap. He took me to my hunter ed class at the Rod and Gun Club. I thought he was just the greatest man I've ever had the pleasure of knowing. And he looked out for us. He made sure we knew the regulations, and he guided us, in our trapping and our fishing and our hunting. And he was just a wonderful, wonderful man.
Sounds like a great guy.
He really was.
Is he still around?
No, he passed away a number of years ago. He was not a young man when I was, a young boy.
Right. What's his name?
Jake Krug.
Okay.
He was a wildlife protector in Alaska, and they used to fly him into the salmon runs, and he'd stay in a tent. And
he loved being outside.
They airdropped his food in to him, by plane, and he said one rotation they missed him, and he had no food.
How long was the food supposed to last? Oh my gosh!
And so he was able to eat salmon because his job was to guard the salmon runs, allow the Inuit people up there to take so many salmon out of each run, and then it was shut down.
Right.
And he was able to survive on salmon. And then finally, he said towards the later part of the month, he just was starving for red meat. He said, I've just got to get something. And so what he did was he laid up on a salmon run and shot a bear.
Mm.
And the only problem was, he said he was starving for red meat. And he said he was just so excited that he was going to have a good dinner. He cooked that bear steak in his frying pan over his campfire, and he tasted that bear steak, and it tasted just like salmon. Because those bears, that's what they were doing.
That's what they
were in the run, gorging on the spring
That's
salmon.
awful.
Run.
That's
and
awful.
He said it was just such a disappointment.
I bet.
He said, but then I had the bear I had to consume, and so there was no choice. He consumed the bear.
Yeah. Wow.
But he was a guy that, and my dad as well, always taught us growing up that wildlife was a gift, and that it was a resource that needed to be protected and honored and not wasted. So if we were trapping muskrat and happened to catch some other animal, and we put it to use, I mean, there was nothing wasted.
Right.
And I'm still that way. I don't waste a lot of food. I don't waste a lot of resources, and I have always protected the wildlife resources of the state.
What's the most difficult thing you've ever hunted? I should say animal, not thing.
Probably trapping fox was the most challenging as a youth. We had red fox and gray fox in the farmland, and they were somewhat problematic around some of the the farms that had chickens.
They'd go after chickens in a
hens,
heartbeat, right?
And cats, and in the fringe areas of neighborhoods, and there weren't a lot of stray cats in the old days because there's so many fox.
Right.
But that was probably the biggest challenge, was fox trapping.
Because they're so sly.
And they're young trappers don't have the skills that more experienced trappers do. And I learned most of what I learned out of books and magazines, and so applying those techniques in the field, sometimes I think we missed a step or two, but we did eventually catch fox, and we trapped fox and raccoon. There were a lot of raccoons in those days, mainly getting into trash cans in the neighborhoods at night, and we trapped them, but we used humane traps mostly once they came on the market,
Yeah.
And we never had a problem with anybody in the community. I know when we caught our first fox, somebody thought we caught a dog and called the Game Warden on us. And when he came out, he said, "Really nice gray fox you got there." And we were proud that we were able to get that fox, and somebody probably from their house saw us walking with a fox, and they thought it was a dog.
Maybe didn't have great vision or something.
Well, a gray fox and a dog do.
Oh, really?
Look somewhat similar
Huh.
to people that don't know wildlife well.
Okay. Wow.
So it was an interesting.
We have red fox around here.
We have reds, and we do have grays too.
I can't remember the last time I saw
Grays
a gray fox.
are they call them tree foxes because they're the only fox that can climb a tree, and they inhabit brushy areas, and fox like more open areas. So they're a similar species. Excuse me. They're a similar species, but they inhabit different areas.
So you did a lot of trapping as a youth. Did you also do hunting with bow and arrow?
I did.
Shotgun, rifle?
I did all those, and enjoyed them immensely. Our deer populations in New York at that time weren't all that tremendous. And so in that local area, there weren't many deer. So we didn't hunt deer much.
Because you really probably shouldn't unless they were overpopulated.
It was open farmland, and long before we were of age, they pretty much disappeared in that area. There had plenty of deer in New York State, of course, but and in the north of us, in the Adirondacks, and south of us, in the Catskills, tremendous deer populations as well. But being young and being on foot, we didn't range but so far,
right.
And no turkey, no deer in the area where we were from. But now there's turkey and there's deer there, just like Virginia.
Yeah,
we have deer everywhere.
Yeah, deer are literally in every state in the continental U.S. just about, right?
They're everywhere.
Yeah,
and they're challenged. I know in western New Jersey and some of the northern populated states, they're having a real problem with deer being hit by cars.
Yeah,
and not that Virginia isn't. We have a tremendous amount of deer hit here as well.
Yeah, I think if you lined up 100 people between the ages of 35 and 60, I think half of them would say they've hit a deer in Virginia.
Yeah, my son's hit 6, going back and forth to his job.
Wow.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
It's terrible.
Yeah, my son's hit 1 as well. I've never hit one.
Yeah, well, knock on wood.
Yeah, absolutely knock on wood. All right, so you finished college, Virginia calls, and you end up being offered the tech role. And when did you become a warden? How old were you when you became a warden?
I was 21 when I became a warden. I went through a regional police academy, Central Virginia Regional Police Academy out of Lynchburg.
Okay.
But it was held satellite in South Hill, or Boyden, Virginia, actually.
This is back in the late 70s.
Yeah, it was. And we went through the police academy with police officers from Lynchburg, the city of Lynchburg, South Hill, Broadnax, Lawrenceville, that whole central section of the state. Mecklenburg County Sheriff's deputies were within our class. And let me tell you, having worked at police academies that are only one jurisdiction and go into a police academy that was multi-jurisdiction, there are a lot of friendships and benefits forged in regional police academies.
Yeah.
Currently, Fish and Game has a closed police academy, similar to a lot of other sheriff's offices and police departments in the state and in the country. But there were a lot of benefits to regional academies.
Yeah, I would imagine those relationships are not only powerful from a personal perspective, but they're also powerful organizationally.
Oh, they are, and they build working relationships that go outside the classroom, beyond. The first felony arrest I made as a warden was about a month after my assignment to Mecklenburg County, and a police officer from South Hill Police Department by the name of Mike Mayer, I think he rose to the ranks. I think eventually he probably became chief down there, was in my graduating class from the academy. And I stopped by South Hill Police Department to say hello to him. And a call came in just outside the town limits of South Hill, out of his jurisdiction, of a murder.
Oh.
So I told him, I said, jump in my car, we're going. Because at the time, Fish and Game officers were conservatives of the peace and had authority to enforce the law, for serious felonies, threatened to life, limb, or property type crimes. And so he jumped in my car, and we caught the youth that had killed his uncle with a shotgun running across a tobacco field. He still had the shotgun in his hand when we were chasing him. And we ran him down, and he before we could get to him, he threw the shotgun into the weeds. But we had marked it, and were able to recover it. And the uncle was laying in the farmyard with a screwdriver in his hand where he was working on the tractor.
He was just working on his tractor.
And, there was a story behind it as well. But it was because of that academy relationship that I had backup that day, and didn't have to pursue that felon on my own.
Yeah, because he had a loaded weapon, presumably.
He had a 12-gauge shotgun, a single shot, thankfully, and I think he fired the only shell he had, but you didn't know that when you were chasing him.
Right. Yeah, he could have had a 6-shooter.
Or he could have had more shells with in his pocket. But the story was the uncle asked his nephew to hand him a screwdriver, and the nephew did not react quick enough for the uncle, so he slapped him. And the youth went into the house, took the shotgun off the mantle, loaded it, walked up behind him, and shot him.
Wow!
And that was the end of that.
In the back, sort of thing.
Yeah, right.
Intending to kill him.
Oh yeah, there was a clear close range. But when we got there, it was July. The dust in the farmyard was like stepping onto the moon. It was about 3 inches deep.
Wow. And
when we arrived, the tractor was still sputtering, and the kid was running across the tobacco field with a gun in his hand.
Was he old enough to understand what he did?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He was of age.
Oh. Wow.
But he was young.
Yeah, that's
crazy. Tragedy all the way around.
Yeah, not great for anybody involved.
No, tragedy.
Yeah. Was that your first murder as a warden?
Yeah, it was. It didn't take long.
Yeah. Wow. So it sounds like there's one warden per county. Do I have that right?
That's the way it was when I was working. I'm not sure what their staffing levels are now. Mecklenburg did have 2 wardens when I was working, and there were some other counties that way because Mecklenburg had the lakes.
Right.
It was just tremendous workload, and really to effectively work patrol boats, it was a lot safer to working with 2 people, especially when you're young and inexperienced. I actually started my first boat patrols on Lake Anna with Francis Boggs. He was an old warden when I was a young man. And on weekends, because I was from New York and everybody else was pretty much from Virginia, everybody would go home and I'd be left, pretty much by myself in the hotels. So I asked the major that was in charge of us, Major Lewis Brandt, a wonderful man. I said, can I work on weekends with wardens anywhere in the state? I was willing to drive. He said, yeah, you can. He said, but we aren't going to pay you for that. I said, I'm not looking for pay. I'm looking for experience.
Yeah.
So I worked every weekend through my academy experience with wardens across the state. I worked with Francis Boggs up on Lake Anna for a number of weeks, and then they started sending me south to Bugs on Lake Aston, and those guys took me in and wanted me to be assigned there. So I wound up starting in Mecklenburg.
Yeah, and those weekends while you're in the academy were probably as informative and educational as Monday through Friday classic instruction, I imagine.
Both parts are critical to your development, but I had a head start on a lot of the guys that I was in the academy with that didn't have that opportunity to work on the weekends. I mean, they were home with their family, they had advantages as well. But I was glad to get the experience, because the biggest boat I had ever driven was probably a 15-foot John boat with a motor on it, and we're running 16, 18-foot patrol boats with twin engines on them, and
they can move.
Yeah, and you have to learn how to operate those safely, and in close quarters you're coming up to boats of all different shapes and sizes, from canoes to yachts, and you need to learn how to do that. And it was great experience, and served me well when I went to Tidewater as a sergeant. Then we were dealing with really big boats,
massive
Chesapeake
boats.
Bay, and the Intercoastal Water, Elizabeth River, and North Landing rivers, all sorts of watercraft. Some of the yachts we'd pull up to during Harborfest in the Norfolk Harbor had helicopter pads on them, and Mercedes sitting on the decks with boats as big as ours.
You have to ask yourself, when you're coming up to these yachts, who are these people that own yachts with Mercedes and boats on top? It's unbelievable.
But we enforced, the law the same for the yachts as we did for the canoes.
Yeah.
It really, we just were impartial and fair and kind as we could be, and tried to educate them as well about the boating safety laws. And Harborfest was a party on the water back then. It was like the Wild West show for those weekends, and we were very busy with the court systems in the city of Norfolk and the city of Portsmouth, with the people that had way too much to drink, that were way too dangerous with flare guns, and setting other boats on fire. It was crazy.
Yeah, there are a lot of people. When I was a kid, and maybe into my 20s and 30s, and I'm 53 now, it felt like people just felt like the rules were very different on the waterway. And
Right.
It's not that way now, but it certainly felt that way when I was much younger.
It was an educational process for a lot of people to come out of that recreational mode that, we can go and do. This is my weekend, and I can be wide open to
Right.
realizing that, unlike the roadway, when you have an accident on the water, you sink below the surface.
Yeah.
And so if the accident didn't kill you, the water did.
Right.
And so it was an educational process with us, and the courts really worked well with us down especially the city of Norfolk. Judge Jordan down there was a great judge. And he was very supportive of what we did and who we were and what we were all about. As time progressed, our enforcement officers had full police powers. And it was no problem for us, because we were trained with full police powers when we were in the academy. And then we were granted those powers by the General Assembly a year or two after I hit the field.
So basically, your entire career, you had full law
I did,
enforcement.
and the academy training was the same as the city officers and the county officers had. So we didn't have to be retrained or re-coordinated, reoriented in what we did. But we did focus on fish, game, and boat enforcement, environmental law enforcement, historic resource protection was something in later years I got our people involved in, looking out for the historic resources of the state, because a lot of the sand dredges dredging that was going on in the Appomattox River was really hard on the wildlife or the fisheries resources.
Right.
They dredge up all that sand in these sand dredges after Civil War artifacts, And so there was a loss of historic resources to the taking of the artifacts off the state property. But in addition to that, all that silt would flow downstream and smother spawning beds of saltwater and freshwater fish. So all those...
Just too much salt.
Just too much silt. I mean,
Silt.
it's just too much... just would smother them. So there were both environmental impacts and historic resource protection impacts that were involved in that.
Yeah, I guess my comment about it felt like people didn't think about boating the same way they do today is there's a lot of water in the state of Virginia. I mean, between the bay, all the large rivers that feed into the bay, the lakes that we've talked about, it's just, I imagine there were times where you felt like your department, whether it was local in Mecklenburg or wherever you were in the state or across the entire state, you guys had to feel undermanned at times.
We did. And, I think that's always the challenge as a state or a self-funded state organization like Fish and Game. We operated back in the old days solely on hunting and fishing and boating registration.
Oh, so it was all...
It was no, other than the federal, there was some federal dollars that came into Fish and Game from the purchase of firearms, Ningle Johnson, the Lacey Putney Act, both funneled some federal funds that are tacked on to when you buy a fishing rod. There's a federal tax there that come back to Fish and Game organizations. And when you buy a firearm, there's federal dollars that come back to Fish and Game organizations. That money, other than that money, that was in the old days, that was the only money we had. As our responsibilities broadened in the state and we were called to do other roles, including drug enforcement, there became a need for the state to try to help fund Fish and Game enforcement, especially, and so there were some dollars that flowed from the state side into Fish and Game.
It's when did that start flowing from the state? Roughly,
maybe 80s.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean not that tremendously long ago, but
yeah,
a while ago, and then there's some non-game responsibilities that were added in towards the end of my tenure there that also helped protect those resources. Species like American eels, elvers they call them, baby eels. We did a lot of work towards the end of my career at protecting that resource. Well, why is that important? A saltwater species that comes into freshwater, why would that be important to freshwater fishery agency? Well, that's the food base for a lot of freshwater species in our rivers. And if you lose that food base, that can cause a degradation of that fisheries resource in those rivers. So we started enforcing those regulations where that saltwater freshwater line was.
Right.
And the old days, I think a lot of those areas were avoided by wardens and avoided by VMRC officers because it was, well, I don't want to get too close to where that line was. So there was a no man's land really there. But as time went on, we defined those areas better. We worked in cooperation with the Marine Agency better, and we were able to kind of attack some of these issues. We had people coming from Maine to Virginia illegally taking baby eels. There was so much money in it.
Wow.
Not too long ago, elvers, those baby eels would sell for $2,000 a pound. The prices,
that's unbelievable.
The price has fallen to about $500.
It's still unbelievable.
Now, but it is, and it was poaching across interstate lines. It was occurring in every state on the eastern seaboard, and Virginia really discovered it first, and then reported it to the other states to be on the lookout for this activity in February, and we uncovered it, made some arrests. The rest not being the issue, but really uncovering a whole market, and they were shipping it over to Asia for some of the Asian countries. American eel, full-grown American eel, is their turkey for Thanksgiving. That's what they eat is American eel. And what they do is they take those baby eels and they put them in plastic bags and they'd inject those bags with air. and seal the bag, put it in a styrofoam cooler, and ship it back to Asia. And they'd raise those baby eels to full-grown eels in hatcheries and sell them in the food trade.
Unbelievable. I have no idea.
And it went on for years.
Under the nose of
pretty much
countless
so.
agencies.
Yeah, and in Maine, it's legal in Maine to do this, and that's where those people were coming from. Is they were taking advantage of those
a gap in the system.
the gap in the system, right?
Yeah. So over the course of your career, would you say you spent more time on the water or more time on land?
Because of my duty assignments, I spent probably more time in the water.
And you enjoyed being on the water?
I did, but we also, in the fall of the year, would transition pretty much out of the boats into the woods for deer season, turkey season, small game season when it came in, but coastal areas, we also had waterfowl enforcement.
Inland fisheries, I've never just figured this out. I guess I could Google this, but I'd prefer to ask an expert. What does inland fisheries mean? Does it mean freshwater, or is there a line between inland and what's on the other side of that?
Yeah, marine.
Okay.
It's the marine salt line on water is where Fish and Game, it's now they call it Department of Wildlife Resources, where they come in contact with salt water. That is the line between our agency and Marine Resource Commissions.
Okay.
Their agency. The difference being our agency is primarily recreational people, and their agency is both recreation and commercial fishermen.
Gotcha. So I'm very familiar with the Rappahannock River.
Right.
And I'm very familiar with part of the river that you can see the bay at.
Right.
Where's the line
on the Rappahannock?
On the Rappahannock.
Paul, I would have to look that up because it's been 16 years.
But it's significantly far away from the Chesapeake because it's salt water there. I mean, we can call it brackish. Well,
Right.
Is brackish considered salt water?
It depends where that line is. Yes, some of the freshwater areas are brackish.
Okay.
Some places it's very clear where the line is. It's a fault line.
Okay.
It's where the tide stops and the fresh water starts. Other places it's a line that's been drawn.
Yeah, and there has to be mutual agreement.
It's through mutual agreement years and years ago on where that line would be.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. But there are lines all over the state.
There are lines all over the state, and this Elver issue was
exploited because it was near the lines.
Well, it was on the line, and it was so that created some issues for sight and awareness, but also it is where that they were most vulnerable to illegal harvest. Is where we first found them. I was an area sergeant in Tidewater in Chesapeake, and one of my counties under my watch was Suffolk. And we found the first illegal elver harvester at the water supply dams for Suffolk, city of Suffolk. And they had actual low-level dams, and the elvers like to shimmy up those water courses to get into the fresh water. And it's an impediment, and it narrows. And it was perfect for them to do.
It was too easy, yeah.
And we found nets, and we found air tanks, and we found plastic bags, and all hidden in the woods. They left them right there, and they'd come in at night, and we caught them on a rainy night. It was pouring down rain, and we were huddled up in the pine trees.
How did the first person you think figure out that elvers would be popular half a world away? I mean, it's unbelievable.
I don't know. There must have been somebody that found them and
realized
came in contact with somebody from Asia that knew the value.
Yeah. Wow.
And so then it started being exploited. Similar things were happening with black bear in Virginia back in those days. Bear galls were being sold on the Asian market.
What's a bear, like a
Gallbladder of a bear.
Because it's edible and...
Well, they use them for Asian medicine. And so what they do is they'd kill a bear, and they were actually killing bears and removing galls and leaving the bear land. There was some harvest by legal, quote, legal harvest by sportsmen, and they would sell the bear gall from the bear, which was illegal to sell back in those days. I'm sure it's still illegal now in Virginia. And we uncovered that going on in Virginia and made numerous arrests in West Virginia. They had it going on. We cooperated with them. We cooperated with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service because those gallbladders were being moved across state lines, which is a federal violation. In addition, the park police, National Forest, we had interaction with them on those, and we were pretty broad in our work with other agencies, federal and state agencies. I'll never forget, I got a call one time when I was in Mecklenburg about somebody, a landowner, farmer that I knew, called me and said somebody's either hunting squirrels during closed season or has a still back in the woods.
Two very different things.
Yeah, very different things. But so I contacted our ABC agent, and we worked together, and he went back and checked it because I thought it was more likely that it was a still than
squirrel problem.
Illegal squirrel hunter during closed season. And of course, he found the still and eventually arrested the guy that was operating the still in Mecklenburg.
Wow.
So, who'd ever think outside of Franklin County you'd find stills in the woods, but...
my great aunt ran moonshine back in the day. It's quite a popular thing.
Find them anywhere.
Yeah,
and that's what I came to realize and it was very close to the state line. I mean, you could have thrown a stone and hit. And those fringe areas where two states come together, where even counties come together, separated by a water course. In the old days, those areas weren't protected the way they are today.
They were exploited.
And many times they were exploited. And that changed as I advanced through the ranks because we paid really special attention to those areas and really got the cooperation going between organizations and even wardens in adjoining counties. We used to check each other's areas when we had a day off. It was a necessity, but it was more than that. It was getting familiar with that fringe area. Meherrin River separated my county from Brunswick County and Lindbergh County when I worked in Mecklenburg, and I'll never forget. I asked the colonel for a canoe to patrol the Meherrin River, and he said, "No, you can't have a canoe." And I said, "But the area is a fringe area between Mecklenburg and Lindbergh County, and I think I can do some good by patrolling that water course." And he said, you got 2 lakes to patrol those. So I went out and bought a canoe and started patrolling the Meherrin River. And I made arrests for shooting deer out of boats. I made arrests for trespassing. I made arrests for fishing without licenses in areas that people probably had been doing it for 20 years because they'd walk or drive way back in some path that a warden would never get into in his patrol vehicle. But when you come down around the bend in the river and there's 5 or 6 people fishing there and don't have licenses and everybody knows you need them. And what that does, though, those arrests, is it changes behavior.
Right.
And that's what we're after.
Yeah.
We were after then, and I'm sure they're after now, is voluntary compliance. And for some people, that's a talking to. For other people, that was a summons. And normally it only happened once, and normally it was a nominal fine for first offense. But eventually, with some people, it takes more than first offense, and their privilege would be revoked for a year, and their equipment would be seized, and those kind of penalties imposed.
Right.
Habitual offenders are habitual offenders, and one of the things I did see with serious wildlife violations is many of those people were felons. They already had a criminal past. Only about 8% of the population of the country is criminal at the felony level.
Have committed felonies and are
At
prone,
8%.
and are prone
Right.
to do it again.
So they're felons, 8%. And I think similarly, what I saw in Virginia through my, 27 years, was about the same amount of people commit serious wildlife violations, about 8% of our population.
Give me an example of a serious wildlife besides the
Shooting
Elver.
deer at night off of roadways onto private property, poaching bears, hunting during closed season, arson of forest land,
Intentionally burning the forest.
yeah,
Who does that?
killing cattle at night. Sometimes it's accidental during illegal behavior, of course, Paul. But
Right.
The end result's the same. When you shoot a black Angus cow in the field in a field thinking it's a deer at night, and then in the morning the farmer goes out there and finds his prize Angus cow laying in the field, that's not good.
Not good at all.
Yeah,
It's his livelihood.
right.
Yeah. What is the craziest story you have from your 27 years?
Craziest story.
It can be crazy. It can be funny. It can be intriguing.
This isn't probably the funniest or most interesting, but it's a story in human nature. I was working the fringe area between the state of North Carolina and the city of Virginia Beach on one spring day, and I saw a boat with 5 people in it, a small John boat, very, very little freeboard.
It's not meant for 5 people. John.
Not meant for 5 people.
Yeah.
Barely above water, but they were all fishing, and I saw them come into Virginia fishing. So I stopped them, and I said, "Gentlemen, you're in Virginia. You don't have Virginia licenses, and you need them. And you have enough life jackets, but you're not far from the line. I'm going to ask you to go back into North Carolina where you're licensed." Paul, I drove down the road, waited about a half an hour, and drove back. And here's the boat, further into Virginia, all of them still fishing.
Are there no fish in North Carolina waters?
So I waved them in. I placed them under arrest at that time. If you were from out of state and you were committed a violation, fish and wildlife violation, you're required to bond them out. I took them to the magistrate. They bonded out. I took them back to where they came from, which was I didn't have to do, but I did take them back. And when they came to court, I explained the story to the judge. And the judge just looked at the guys and and shook his head and he said, "I don't think the state of North Carolina would have treated you guys so kindly." And imposed a fine and told them to get their licenses before they came back and fished in Virginia.
Were they just being lazy?
I think they just thought that Fish and Game Enforcement was just a process of checking licenses and moving on.
Yeah,
And
gotcha.
it's so much more than that
Yeah. Wow.
for us.
So you did 27 years. What's your fondest memory in those 27 years?
My fondest memory.
Could be about the people you knew. Could be about something that you're really proud of.
Probably teaching hunter education in the public school system down there.
Oh, that's cool.
For years afterwards, I'd have young men and young women, and from South Hill and that area, and Bluestone High School, and come up to me and talk to me like an old friend.
Wow.
And at the time, you don't think you're making any difference in their life, but you come to realize later on that you do make a difference, and their lives are enriched by your experience with them. I had a kid one time. a young boy that was hunting in the road. He was 12 or 13 years old. And at that age, he had to be supervised by a parent or guardian. And the guardian was a little bit too far from him. And he was standing in the middle of the road with a shotgun loaded. I came around the bend in the road and my patrol car pulled over. And I talked to the boy and explained to him that you can't hunt in the road. You got to be up on the other side of the ditch line, faced away from the road. And Paul, he was small enough that I could pick him up. And I picked him up and put him on the bank. And redirected him to a safe location and went down the road and talked to the guy that was supposed to be supervising him. And I said, you need to be closer to that boy. You can't be that far away. I wasn't a mile down the road, and I got a call from the magistrate's office in Boyden, and the dispatcher said to me, the magistrate would like to talk to you. And I didn't know what it was about, but I drove into the magistrate's office and went in the magistrate's office and talked to the magistrate. She said to me, Jeff, you just stopped my son down the road, and I want to thank you for the way you treated him. And I said, I wouldn't have treated him any different if he was a stranger, but I didn't know he was your son.
Right.
But it really didn't make a difference on how I treated him. But I appreciate your kind words. And it's that kind of experience that really makes you feel like the job was your chosen profession.
Yeah, and everybody loves to hear that reinforcement because it actually boosts your morale, your energy for what you're doing. And hearing that from time to time is definitely helpful.
And as a young warden, I didn't know what I was getting called to the principal's office about. And I wasn't sure if the magistrate was going to provide some guidance for me on how to do my job better next time, but I had no idea it was her son. I mean, I didn't even know she had a son.
Yeah, chances were it was going to be a negative experience.
I expected that it probably would be at that point in my career.
Yeah. All right, so you rose to the level of chief.
I did.
Effectively, like an 06 in the state police rank.
Right. Sure, that's it. Colonel. Yeah.
Colonel, you're running the whole thing.
Yeah, I was.
How many people that started as an early 20-something end up being the colonel of the whole thing? Or the chief
I was
of the
the
whole thing?
second colonel that came out of the ranks in the history of the department.
Really? Where did the other?
They were wildlife biologists.
Huh.
So Gerald Simmons was a major when I went to work. He was from Mecklenburg County. I was assigned to his home county. So everything I did was I was interacting with his friends that he grew up with.
Wow.
And Gerald Simmons was the first. He rose through the ranks to major when I was there, and then eventually he became colonel. He was the first. Following Gerald Simmons, they brought in Joe Lynch from New York State. He was the chief of law enforcement for New York State Fish and Game, and he came in and he stayed about 6 months. And at the time, I was a newly promoted captain. And they interviewed nationwide. They had a nationwide search. And I'll never forget it. I was young. I was 35 or so. And every time you would go through the next tier of interviews, I'd go home and tell my wife, I said, man, I can't believe it. I made the next cut. I made the next cut. And when they got down to the last two, one Friday afternoon, I was called into the agency's director's office. He's appointed by the governor. And he said, Jeff, I know you're young, but I'd like you to take the job as chief.
So wait a minute. So the U.S. Army has lieutenants, captains, majors, lieutenant colonels, and colonels. You skipped from captain to colonel?
I did.
That's unheard of, right?
It was. It was I had a lot to learn, but I had really good people that helped me. One of the things it did give me was that field experience and innovation that I carried right into the boss's office. It wasn't 20 years from the time I was a major to, or 15 years. We changed the uniforms. We got them great boots and great warm coats. You
were taking care of the guys.
We got rid of the state police rain jackets. You see a state trooper out here directing traffic in those long raincoats down to your ankles. We bought Gore-Tex tops and bottoms. We bought GPS. We bought all the latest, greatest. We computerized the field force way ahead of any other organization in the country. I was at a meeting one time, and we were talking about computerization, and one of the guys in the audience, one of the wardens from another state, asked a question about computers, and I asked him, I said, do you have a laptop? And he said, I've got a lap. So
he was halfway there.
All those things were, for us, leaps and bounds from where we were in the old days when I started with Army surplus. Irregular boots is what they'd issue. And now our guys had boots that would keep their feet dry.
They had proper equipment.
They did. Yeah. And, the radio system improved vastly through the years because of a state-level initiative, and we were partnered with the state police on that initiative as well as a lot of other state agencies. So it was all good.
Yeah, that's... you. How long were you chief?
About 15, 16 years.
So a long time.
For
a chief, and it sounds like you accomplished a ton.
I was pleased. We put AEDs, defibrillators, in the hands of wardens statewide because many times when there was a critical medical issue or a critical law enforcement issue, a warden was one of the first people on the scene.
Right.
Because they had that cooperation with other sheriff's offices. And I used to talk to the new incoming sheriffs every year and explain what our guys were and gals were, what they did, and how we could interact with them if they'd call us. Some of the big city police departments, it was kind of a different, a whole different dynamic going on. They knew who we were, and they talked to us on the cell phone when we had cell phones. But before that, I was in Tidewater, and down there, Norfolk PD, Chesapeake PD, Suffolk, we would get calls from their dispatchers, but we never interacted because there were big, huge departments.
Massive departments, and maybe didn't see fish and game the same way.
They didn't, and they had other priorities, and as we did, but that didn't mean we didn't make inroads. I remember I was on a point one day, and there was a guy shooting seagulls illegally, just for sport. He was
who does that?
Killing them. And I walked in behind him, and I was engaged with the guy, and all of a sudden I heard a helicopter, and I turned around, and in the field behind me, Portsmouth PD landed. Their police department landed in their helicopter. And the guy came out. He said, "Got everything under control?" And I said, "Thanks for backing me up. I appreciate you."
Yeah.
And but it's that kind of thing. But it was really more of an individual contact thing,
right?
Which in rural counties, you have a prison break at a correctional facility,
right? Mecklenburg and Lunenburg in particular.
Yeah, but even South Side, all South Side. One of the first people you'd see on the scene would be a warden. He'd help track. He'd help search. He provided another officer in a sheriff's office that probably had 6 people in some cases. Now they had 7.
Right. Yeah.
And it was great.
That's awesome. So you did 27 years total, we mentioned.
Right.
You were not 50, right?
I went out at 50. I retired
at 50.
At 50, yes.
And so were you retired, or what was your next phase of?
I was retired. I did go back and did and work a small job for Fish and Game afterwards, helping the non-law enforcement side of the organization make use of a computer training system that the state had that was underutilized. And so I went back briefly for that. But really what I did, Paul, was transition to a different kind of public service. A public service to help feed the hungry, to help house people that are homeless or couldn't afford housing, and to comfort people on some of the worst days of their lives after they've lost a loved one.
Right.
And it's just as rewarding a work The only difference is there's no paycheck.
Yeah.
At least not in this world.
Right.
I hope there's a paycheck later on in the next world. But
And is that entirely through the Knights of Columbus?
yes, I would say it is through the Knights. My work in the Knights of Columbus.
Yeah, and how big is your chapter? Is chapter the right term?
Yeah, council. We have
Council.
About 320 members.
That's big.
Yeah, it is a big council. I think that's correct. And we have probably 150 very active people. We have worked in cooperation with a local food bank for 21 years. And I've been working helping with the food bank for 16 ever since I retired. And so we moved 20,000 pounds of food from one local grocery store in Hanover County. And that food would go in the dumpster if we didn't pick it up. And it goes to Feeding the Hungry.
It's still edible.
The meat is frozen as soon as they take it off their shelves, and they hold it for us. The produce is kept in cold storage, and we move it to cold storage. And we feed 77,000 pounds of food collected in the same way at that food bank every year. And the Knights are a big part of that food distribution.
Yeah. It's amazing work and important work.
It's important work. And, we produce enough food in this country to feed everybody.
Yeah, there's no question
We
about
just
that.
need to be innovative and creative on how quick we can get it to people that really need it.
We are quite wasteful as a society.
And we can do better. And
we
we
do a
are
lot
doing
better.
better in Hanover County, Virginia. We are making a difference, I think.
Yeah, well, that's is that where you met my father-in-law?
I did through the Knights. Actually, your father-in-law and I cooked together.
He loves being in that kitchen.
Yeah, I gave up my shield and my gun and my uniform, and I put on a work apron in the kitchen and a fluorescent vest at the food bank, and that's what I do now.
Have you always enjoyed cooking, or is it just who you're cooking for is what matters? And
I
it's
think
less about
who
the
I'm cooking for is more important than the work. But we cook for meetings. We cook for church events. We used to cook for the French Food Festival in the city of Richmond that was held every year.
I'm surprised French Food Festival. I would have expected Italian maybe instead.
We were under a chef,
Okay.
a professionally trained chef, and we were the Cajun tent, and that was our charge.
That sounds fun.
Tent. It was great. We had a wonderful time. And the Little Sisters of the Poor, who ran nursing homes for the poorest of the poor in the city of Richmond for 130 years. They've been doing this. They finally closed their doors this past year.
Because of the pandemic?
No, they were having trouble getting nuns to work to run the facilities.
Wow, that's sad.
So they had to close their doors. And so no longer the city of Richmond and the surrounding area had the French Food Festival. They're hoping to revive it, and if they do, I'm confident our Knights of Columbus Council will be in cooperation with other councils that help with the same thing.
The council covers a geographic area, or it's certain churches?
It's mainly, in our case, a church, but the furthest member I know of we have is a guy in Dinwiddie that used to be a parishioner that moved.
But he still wants to be part of the council.
And he still wants to be part of the council.
Yeah.
The priest that left our church was reassigned in a nearby parish. He's still a member of our council. He wants to be a member.
Is it Father Jim?
Father Jay.
Jay. Okay.
Wagner.
Because today the priest at the church is Jim, and then before him it was Jay, and before him was Jim.
Right.
Yeah.
Father Jay Wagner is the priest that's going to be our chaplain next year, and he's a great guy. He just so enjoys being part of that organization.
No, that's fantastic. Well, you're doing great work, and I imagine there's a lot of camaraderie. And
there is, and and there's not a world or national incident that the Knights of Columbus isn't involved in. Just recently, with Ukraine and the needs of the people that are fleeing Ukraine, and the people that are in Ukraine. The Knights of Columbus decided that they were going to try to raise $1 million to send for relief. Paul, they raised $7 million so far, and they're sending that to help the refugees in Poland and surrounding countries as well as Ukraine. That's what you can do with the largest Catholic men's organization in the world.
Yeah, if only every organization was so giving, and every person who's a member of the Knights was as giving as the Knights are, I imagine how wonderful the world would be.
It's the Midwest tornadoes. Our council decided we wanted to help with that situation. I know we're a relatively small group of men in comparison to what the major organization is, and so immediately we put out the word, we're going to collect money for tornado victims. Kentucky Knights of Columbus was the first organization in those impacted states that put up a website for giving to that cause. So we raised a couple of $1,000s immediately and sent it to Kentucky Knights of Columbus. And we raised a couple of thousand more and sent it. In those disaster scenes, there's help coming. But if you're standing out in the rain in your pajamas and you have nothing to eat and no place to sleep, that immediate money is so critical. It's before insurance can pay off. It's before federal aid programs can step in.
It's not bureaucratic.
It's immediate. And what was happening was some of those councils were walking around with gift cards from Walmart and other vendors and said, here, you're standing here in the rain with your family. You need a place to sleep. You need food to eat. You need clothing. Take this card and go get what you need.
Yeah.
And that's what we did as a council. It was just part of a push that came later by our, national organization. But,
right.
In the shootings in Virginia Beach a couple of years ago, I don't remember when the courthouse complex down there was attacked. We had a pancake breakfast at church that occurred that weekend, and I put a plastic jar by the coffee pot and said, "Aid to the victims of the shooting in Virginia Beach," and we sent $700.
Yeah.
There that Monday after that shooting to help with what people needed.
Yeah.
That's what
awesome.
small, agile organizations can do. We can do it quicker than bigger organizations that will come later, and they're all important, but that immediate action kind of can spark
the first 24, 48 hours kind of thing.
I mean, it's so important to those people.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's it's inspiring.
Right.
That's really cool to be a part of, and I imagine it's been fulfilling ever since you started.
It's a joy. It's just a different kind of public service.
All right, I'm going to awkwardly pivot to a question we ask most of our guests towards the end. Imagine you're a talk show host. It could be late night, it can be middle of the day, but you're going to have guests, and you get to decide who those guests are. They can be alive or dead. They can be famous. They can be people that you know. They can be entertaining. They can be thought-provoking. It's whatever you want them to be. One man, one woman, and musical group, and this is meant to be a little more revealing about you.
The man would be Teddy Roosevelt.
Okay.
Because of his natural resource foresight.
He's the national parks president. Do I have that right?
He is, and he created the Adirondack Park in New York State, which was
he's from New York,
the largest,
right?
Largest state-owned public watershed protection program in the country.
Is Roosevelt the proper way to say it? Because I grew up saying Roosevelt. Roosevelt, because there are two O's there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Two O's. Thank you. Female.
And as you're thinking, Teddy was also the only president, I think the only person to ever win both the Congressional Medal of Honor and the Nobel Peace Prize. He's the only person to ever have done both.
Madame Curie.
Okay.
Would be the woman. Boy, if there ever was a time for a biological genius, is now.
Yeah, yeah.
The pandemic we just came through.
We need another.
We need
Matt
another,
Curie.
and we do have them. They're out there. They're working every day to try to solve these issues, and God love them.
Yeah.
And God bless them. Music. I'm a James Taylor fan.
Okay, you can't go wrong with James Taylor.
He was my era, and I like country music a lot. And I mainly listen to country music now, but James Taylor is kind of in my soul.
Yeah, he's a fantastic musician. He's got a very soothing voice too. Very cool. All right, let's end with talking about your family. Tell us about your family.
My wife Maureen, I met her in college. She's from a little town in upstate New York called Little Falls, known as the cheese capital of the world in the late early 1900s. It's a mill town. Everything's on a hill, and it's snowy in the winter, and everything slides through those intersections. There's not a stop sign on a down street in the whole city. It's all cross streets because there's no way to stop at the stop sign in the winter. She's my one and only. We've been together for 43 years, and we have 2 children, Christopher and Jennifer. Christopher is a nuclear security officer at the power plant on Lake Anna. It's kind of funny. His circle came back to my circle on start at Lake Anna. And my daughter Jennifer is married and lives in Williamsburg now, and she teaches in the York public school system. She's a biology teacher.
So you could probably teach her a few things, or have taught her a few things.
Well, I think I taught her a few things about the outdoors, and she'll call me from time to time with pictures of tracks and insects and wild things, and I love it.
That's a great way to bond with your daughter. That's
It is.
awesome. Yeah.
We have that in common, and she does love the outdoors. She likes to canoe and be outside and
Chip off the old block, it sounds like.
yeah. I have 2 grandchildren, one from each of my children, and both girls. That one is a fisherman, and the other will be a fisherman.
Whether they want to or not, or
Whether they want to or no, they'll embrace it like all the others, have.
That's fantastic. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all you do with the Knights, and thank you for your service to the Commonwealth and to those localities you serve. It's important work.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much.
Great having
Appreciate
you.
you having me.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.